review, we learned topic 1.1 and 1.2 previously. Topic 1.1, we learned about what statistics is, the two types of statistics, descriptive and inferential. We learned a little bit about what it means to be the difference between a population parameter or maybe a sample statistic. So the population is everybody. Sample would be a part of the people that we pull from the population. We learned about individuals are the people, are the who in the study. Variables are the what is being studied. The different types of variables would be quantitative and qualitative. You know, quantity would be numerical measurement. Qualitative would describe something. Remember, sometimes a zip code could be qualitative and not really quantitative. So that was a little bit about what you learned in 1.1. We learned about levels of measurement, which means the nominal, I'll put this over here, nominal, ordinal, interval, ratios. So remember, nominal are names, ordinal, like good, better, best, a ranking of sorts. Ranking is a keyword that you'll see. Interval and ratio can often be confused because a lot of times we are talking about numbers with intervals, but remember there's no true zero with intervals. Like 0 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't mean that there's not a temperature outside. It's just that's what is describing the actual temperature. Ratio does have a true zero. For instance, money, we can have 0 money. Time passing, if 0 time passed, we could call that ratio, but if we're talking about an actual time, like 1 o'clock or 12 minutes after midnight, you know, that would be interval. That's not a measurement of time. So we're now on to the introduction to experimental design. So we have to kind of understand some terminology to be able to go to the questions that are on the next page and read through these problems and select all that would apply in a certain type of experiment or things that might be implied in the problem. So let's just go over some terminology. Now, I'm never going to ask you to just define it, but the information is here. If you don't know what something means, you can look at your notes to define that. So an observational or common techniques for gathering data. One way is to observe, like an observational study. So we just make an observation and the researcher is not interfering whenever they're observing. So observation and measurements of individuals conducted in a way that does not change the response or the variable being measured. The researcher observes without interfering. Another technique is experiments. You hear about experiments a lot, especially in the medical world, but that would be a treatment that's deliberately imposed on the individuals in order to observe a possible change in the response or variable being measured. The best technique for reaching valid conclusions would be to experiment. So a couple things to know about experiments. Completely randomized experiments would be those that the process is assigned to each individual to one of the treatments, you know, so it's a random process, kind of like the random number table you just learned about in your 1.2 discussions. It's just randomly picked. No way to control who's being picked. There also is something called a randomized block experiment. So maybe individuals are sorted into blocks. You might think about classrooms or something, and then they randomly pick those classroom of people. So a common feature that it says individuals are sorted into blocks. Maybe a common feature that might affect treatments. So if you're talking about, you know, medical world. So something that they're testing and then randomly assigned to one of those treatments. So like a room of people could be assigned to a treatment. Control group, when we're talking about experiments, would be Those are the people that receive the dummy treatment. You've heard of the placebo effect. So that variable does not influence the results. It's just, just a control group. Randomization used to assign individuals to treatment groups, and it helps prevent bias. So you'll be reading through some of these problems and it will want you to eliminate bias. And so that's just what randomization means in those problems that we'll be reading. Replication is repetition of a research study. It's used to determine if findings can be applied to other participants or circumstances. And then the third type of technique for gathering data is surveys. So we have observational study, we have experiments, and we have surveys. And that's just the process of gathering data about people by asking them questions. Other gathering data terminology to be aware of is sampling. Measurements or observations from part of the population are used. So you have your whole population, for instance, Northern Oklahoma's college students, and maybe we sample elementary stat students to be part of a study. That would be sampling. Experiment treatment is deliberately imposed. So they do that on purpose and they observe what happens. They get data from that. Simulation, a numerical likeness of real world outcomes, kind of like you go in an airplane simulator or something. They try to find a real world outcome in whatever they're doing. Census is a measurement or observations from the entire population. So these words are just important because we're going to be turning the page. We're going to be trying to answer what the best response will be to some questions. Sometimes you will have more than one answer, and sometimes only one is the best answer out of all of your multiple choice options. And it's just kind of understanding terminology and kind of thinking more in a statistical way on how you might do an experiment without bias, or how you might do a survey in a group, and who's being surveyed, those things. So let's look at example 1. A study of college graduates involves 3 variables. So they're studying these graduates probably about their jobs once they graduated, and they're going to study their income level, their job satisfaction, and their commute times to work. List some ways that the variables might be confounded. And that just means, so like variables are things that would affect their decision making in their job, picking their job. So maybe something that could be hidden, that isn't really stated, but you could probably pull from what could happen in the real world. And this one does say select all that apply, so we could be selecting more than one possibly. So let's talk through these. So 1 says people may have a career following their passion, but have low income or a long commute. And I believe that's probably true. Just as an educator, I don't have a long commute, but I definitely don't have a super high income paying job. But my job satisfaction is pretty high. I like what I do. So, you're thinking about all 3 of those variables that are stated, but what are some hidden variables that could affect the income level, job satisfaction, commute times, or do they affect each other in one way or another sometimes? So people with long commutes will have very high incomes. That's not really a cause and effect, is it? So that would probably be false. So I would not select that one. People might be very satisfied with their career as long as the income is high. I mean, I would definitely love more income, but that doesn't mean that I would be satisfied with my career, I don't think. Think about many people that are doing the grind of a job that they don't love, but they might make a lot of money and they just keep doing it because of the money. So I think there is a hidden variable in there. That might not be true. People who are very unsatisfied with their jobs will have a low income. So I don't think that's a cause and effect either. I don't think that just because they're unsatisfied that they'll have low income. However, if it's a performance-based job, I do think that that could affect it. A working spouse could affect all three of those variables, which I do believe that that's true. Just for instance, as a mother, I have a toddler, and if I had to commute a really long ways to work, and he couldn't help me with drop off or pickup, I know that alone would be true. I think income level and job satisfaction, you know, I think my spouse could encourage me or discourage me in my job sometimes. I don't really think my working spouse necessarily could affect my income directly, but maybe since he has a job, I would choose a lower paying job just to be happy with that job. So I do think a working spouse could affect all three variables in some way. One-way commute times may be long because affordable housing is distance from the job. And I think that could be true. You know, if you live in a small town, you commute to a metro of sorts, you know, the cost of living in a big city where there's a lot of less real estate available could be higher. So you're basically on that one, just kind of begin what all you think would apply. You know, think about the hidden variables in that. What are some statements that make that true? And think about any hidden variables that could make it not true, and so we would not pick those. All right, example 2, consider a completely randomized experiment in which a control group is given a placebo for congestion relief, and a treatment group is given a new drug for congestion relief. Describe a double-blind procedure for this experiment. So first you need to know a double-blind procedure means that the patient and the administrator are basically in the dark. Meaning they don't know which patient is getting the treatment, and the patient doesn't know if they're getting the treatment or not, or the placebo effect. So that's why we learned some of those terminologies on the previous page. We talked about a completely randomized experiment, so nobody knows who's being picked for what, in which a control group, so a placebo effect is given, right, is given a placebo for congestion relief, and then there is a treatment group, the group that's actually receiving the drug that's new to test, is given for congestion relief. So for this experiment that they're doing, we need to describe a double-blind procedure. So you need to pick the one that describes it most accurately. There's not a multiple, you can't choose more than one. The patients do not know which treatment they received. So that's true, the patient doesn't, but also the administrator doesn't. And that's what the next one says. The patients do not know which treatment the other patients received, actually. So that would be true, because if the patient doesn't know, the administrator doesn't know, but so that means the patient wouldn't know what other patients are getting. But this one states both of those things. If it's a double-blind procedure, then that means you have two people that are participating in this experiment, two specific important people, and that would be the patient and the administrator of the treatment. So it says neither the patient nor those administering the treatment know which patients received which treatment. So that would probably be the very best way to describe it. The last one says those administering the treatments do not know which patients received the treatment. So that's true, but it doesn't talk about a double-blind procedure showing both sides of that. So pick the one that describes it the most accurate way. And then going along with that, it says, what are some benefits of such procedures? Select all that apply. So this process should eliminate potential bias from the treatment administrators. I would say that's true. That way they don't try to give it to somebody that they think it will react in a way that they hope that it reacts. This process should eliminate potential bias from the patient's family. Remember, the two most important people in this double-blind procedure are the patients and the administrators. So we really don't even care about the patient's family. That may be true, but some benefits of the procedure really are just affecting, for the most part, in the experiment, those that are administrating the treatment and those that are getting the treatment. So this process should eliminate potential bias from the researchers. Again, I think that's true. But our most important people in this are the patient and the administrators. So the process should eliminate potential bias from patient psychology regarding the benefits of the drug. And so because, again, we talked about the patient this time, I think that's true. You know, the patient doesn't know if they're getting it or not, so it should eliminate, oh, I'm getting the medicine, I'm feeling better now, or oh, I'm not getting the medicine, I'm just getting the placebo pill, so it's not working, I can just tell. So anything that's, when we're applying it to one above, the two most important who's in the problem individuals would be like the administrators and the patients, and that would help you answer that in the best way possible. Which technique for gathering data, which was the sampling, experiment, simulation, or census, do you think was used in the following studies? So we have some A, B, C's, and D's on the next page that we'll go through just to practice that we learned on the previous page, some of those different types of terminology that we learned. And we're going to apply it. Which type of technique would they use for gathering this data? An analysis of a sample of 31,000 patients from New York hospitals suggests that the poor and the elderly sue for malpractice at 1/5 of the rate of the wealthier patients. You probably could have just stopped at the word sample, because that means you're sampling. You're going to sample from 31,000 patients. The effects of wind shear on airplanes during both landing and takeoff were studied by using complex computer programs that mimic actual flight. So that would be a simulation. It's going to mimic something in real life, because the definition that we learned from the previous page in right here, a numerical likeness of real world outcomes. So that would be a real world outcome, mimicking the real world. A study of all league football scores attained through touchdown and field goals were conducted by the NFL. Determine whether field goals account for more scoring events than touchdowns. So in this one, you need to think what's happening. They're in the real world studying something though, right? Studying of all, it's important because that would be like a population. It's a study of all league football scores attained. So this would be an actual census. Because of the word all, that means they're going to study a population of people. And again, let me get my paper back out so that we can go back to that. I don't know where it's it now already, but a measurement or observation from an entire population. So you can tell one thing, you know, there's always these key words and certain things that help us. And the word all would represent like the entire population in that one. So that's how you would know it would be a census. An Australian study included 588 men and women who already had some precancerous skin lesions. Half got skin cream containing a sunscreen with a sun protection factor of 17, and then the other half got the inactive cream. So it sounds like to me they're doing an experiment. Half got the cream, the one with sunscreen, and half got an active cream. So after 7 months, those using the sunscreen with the sun protection had fewer precancerous lesions.